In the heart of a devastating blizzard that buried the Wyoming Territory under 3 feet of snow, a desperate widow counted her last $23 with only 10 days before losing everything. When 10 hardened cowboys appeared at her door seeking shelter, she opened it without hesitation and shared her final provisions. By sunrise, the thunder of 50 horses echoed across Bitter Creek Valley as riders from across the territory gathered at her gate. Before we dive into this incredible story, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Martha Hawthorne stood in the doorway of her modest ranch house, staring at the crumpled bills in her calloused hands. $23. That was all that remained between her and the foreclosure notice that banker Whitmore had delivered just yesterday. 10 days to pay the $800 she owed or lose Crosswinds Ranch forever. Outside, the wind howled like a pack of wolves, and snow fell in thick, angry sheets that turned the world beyond her windows into a white void. At 48 years old, Maddie had weathered many storms, but this one felt different. This one felt like an ending. She moved slowly through the empty ranch house, her boots echoing on the worn wooden floors. The parlor sat cold and dark, the furniture covered in dust sheets like ghosts of better times. The kitchen held only bare shelves and the lingering scent of the last loaf of bread she'd baked 3 days ago. The fire in the hearth struggled against the mountain cold, its flames dancing weakly as if they too had given up hope. Maddie paused at the window that faced the main trail, where Samuel's favorite rocking chair still sat untouched. Even 3 years after the fever took him, she could still see him there, his weathered face creased with smile lines as he watched the cattle drivers pass by on their way to market. They'd built this place together 20 years ago, with nothing but dreams and the small inheritance from her father's silver claim. "We'll make something special here, Maddie girl," Samuel used to say, his blue eyes twinkling with optimism. "This ranch will be a refuge for travelers, a place where folks can find a hot meal and a safe bed, no matter what brings them to our door." Now the ranch felt more like a tomb than a refuge. The barn stood half empty, most of the livestock sold to pay mounting debts. The bunkhouse that once housed 6 ranch hands now sheltered only mice and memories. Maddie pulled her wool shawl tighter around her shoulders and returned to the kitchen table where the foreclosure notice seemed to mock her with its official seal and cold legal language. The Crosswinds Ranch had once been a thriving operation, a vital stop along the cattle trail that connected the northern ranges to the railroad depot in Cedar Ridge. But drought had killed the grass, disease had taken the herd, and Samuel's death had taken her heart for the work. She'd already sold her mother's wedding ring, Samuel's prized Winchester rifle, everything of value they'd accumulated over their 23 years of marriage. The ranch was all she had left, and in 10 days, even that would be gone. Through the frosted window, she could see the main trail disappearing under the relentless snow. The path that had once brought life and prosperity to Crosswinds Ranch was now buried beneath drifts that reached the fence posts. The blizzard had been raging for 2 days already, and according to the almanac, it showed no signs of stopping. No travelers would be passing through in weather like this. No one would even know when she was finally forced to leave, when the bank took the last piece of the life she and Samuel had built together. Maddie glanced at the old clock on the mantel. 7:30 in the evening. Time to bank the fire, blow out the lamps, and face another night of wondering how she'd failed so completely. She was reaching for the damper on the stove when she heard it, a sound that cut through the howling wind like thunder rolling across the valley. At first she thought it might be a freight wagon, but the rhythm was different, more complex. The steady drumbeat of multiple horses moving in formation despite the treacherous conditions. Maddie pressed her face to the frost-covered window, squinting through the swirling snow. Slowly, shapes began to emerge from the white darkness. Riders, at least 10 of them, their horses laboring through the deep drifts as they approached her ranch. As they drew closer, she could make out the silhouettes of men bundled in heavy coats and wide-brimmed hats, their faces hidden beneath scarves and ice-crusted beards. These weren't ordinary travelers. The riders moved with the practiced coordination of men who'd spent their lives in the saddle, their horses picking their way through the snowdrifts with careful precision. As they entered the circle of light cast by Maddie's kitchen window, she could see they weren't just any cowboys. These men had the hard-edged look of those who lived by their own rules, the kind who settled disputes with iron rather than words. Their leader dismounted first, a tall man with broad shoulders who seemed to command the others without speaking. Even through his heavy winter coat, Maddie could see the telltale bulge of twin colts at his hips. Behind him, the other riders were climbing down from their horses, and she could make out the weathered faces of men who'd seen too much frontier justice and dealt out their fair share of it. The youngest couldn't have been more than 22, but he carried himself with the swagger of someone trying to prove he belonged with these dangerous men. An older cowboy with a gray beard that reached his chest moved with the careful grace of a man who'd survived more gunfights than most. Another sported a red bandana and the kind of scars that came from knife work, while his companion kept his hand resting casually on the butt of his pistol as he surveyed the ranch. The leader approached the porch, his boots crunching through the snow with deliberate steps. Through the frosted glass, Maddie could see his face clearly now, weathered leather skin, steel-gray eyes that had seen too much, and a jaw set with the kind of determination that had probably put more than one man in the ground. He knocked on her door, 3 sharp raps that somehow managed to be both respectful and urgent. Maddie's hand hovered over the door latch, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to keep the door barred, to blow out the lamps and pretend no one was home. These men looked like the kind who took what they wanted and left graves in their wake. She'd heard stories of what happened to isolated ranch women when desperados came calling, especially during storms when no one would hear the screams. But then she noticed something that gave her pause. Despite their fearsome appearance, the men remained in the yard, not crowding the porch or trying to peer through windows. Their horses stood quietly, steam rising from their flanks in the cold air. The leader kept his hands visible, his posture non-threatening despite the artillery strapped to his waist. And there was something in his eyes when their gazes met through the glass, exhaustion that went bone deep, the kind that came from fighting the elements for hours on end. These men, dangerous as they might be, were at the end of their rope. "Ma'am," the leader called through the door, his voice rough from the cold and probably years of harsh living. "I know this is an imposition, but we've been riding for 16 hours straight. The main trail's completely blocked about 5 miles back, and we're not going to make it much further in this weather." Maddie pressed her ear to the door, listening to the wind that seemed to be getting stronger by the minute. The temperature had been dropping all day, and she could hear the ice forming on the eaves above the porch. "How many of you are there?" she called back, already knowing the answer, but needing to hear it confirmed. 10 of us, ma'am. Name's Cole Brennan. We're part of a cattle outfit heading back from a drive down to Denver. We've got coin for food and shelter, and I give you my word we won't cause any trouble. We just need somewhere warm to wait out the storm." Maddie looked at the $23 on her kitchen table, then at the foreclosure notice that would seal her fate in 10 days. 10 men would eat everything she had left and more. But as she studied their faces through the window, she saw something beneath the hard edges and dangerous reputations. These were men who'd been fighting for their lives against the storm, probably for the better part of the day. Samuel's voice echoed in her memory. "A refuge for travelers, Maddie girl. A place where folks can find help no matter what brings them to our door." She walked to the door and lifted the heavy wooden bar. The moment Maddie opened the door, the full fury of the blizzard hit her like a physical blow. Snow and ice crystals whipped into the kitchen, and the temperature plummeted 20 degrees in seconds. The man standing on her threshold was covered head to toe in snow and ice, his mustache white with frost, his coat frozen stiff as armor. But it wasn't just Cole Brennan waiting in the storm. Behind him, Maddie could see the others dismounting from their horses, and her breath caught in her throat. These weren't ordinary ranch hands or cattle drivers. The way they moved, the way they wore their guns, the casual confidence in their bearing, these were men who'd earned their reputations the hard way. Cole himself was easily 6 feet tall, with steel gray hair that showed beneath his ice-crusted hat. A jagged scar ran from his left ear to his jaw, and his eyes, pale blue as winter ice, held the weight of a man who'd made hard choices and lived with the consequences. The Colts at his hips weren't for show. They were working tools, worn smooth from years of use. Behind him, the gray-bearded cowboy she'd noticed earlier moved with the careful grace of an aging gunfighter. Buck Sullivan, she heard one of them call him, and even through the storm she could see the bone-deep wariness of a man who'd survived by being faster and meaner than whoever wanted him dead. The youngest of the group couldn't hide his nervousness despite his swagger. Jesse Martinez, barely old enough to shave, but he carried his iron low and tied down like the older men. His eyes darted constantly, watching for threats that might emerge from the white void beyond the ranch. "Come in," Maddie said, stepping aside. "All of you, before you freeze to death out there." The relief on Cole's face was immediate and profound. "Much obliged, ma'am. You have no idea what this means." The cowboys filed in one by one, stomping snow off their boots and shaking ice from their coats. They were big men, most of them, the kind who'd learned to take up space in a world that respected nothing but strength. Their spurs jingled softly as they moved, and she caught glimpses of iron beneath their heavy coats. Not just pistols, but knives, and at least one sawed-off shotgun. But despite their fearsome appearance, they moved carefully in her small kitchen, conscious of their size, respectful of the space they'd been given. Buck actually removed his hat when he crossed the threshold, and she caught several of them wiping their boots extra clean before stepping onto her wooden floors. "Find places wherever you can," Maddie told them, gesturing toward the parlor and kitchen. "I'll get some coffee started and see what I can rustle up for supper." The men settled into chairs and against walls with obvious gratitude, their frozen leather creaking as they moved. Up close, Maddie could see the details that the storm had hidden. The careful maintenance of their weapons, the quality of their boots and saddles visible through the kitchen window, the way they instinctively arranged themselves so that the older, more experienced men had clear sight lines to the doors and windows. Red Mackenzie, a lean cowboy with rust-colored hair and a Scottish accent, took a spot near the window where he could watch their horses. Tom Carter, quiet and dark-eyed, positioned himself where he could see both the front door and the back. These men had survived by being careful, and even in sanctuary, old habits died hard. "Haven't seen weather like this since the winter of '81, Cole said, settling into Samuel's old chair near the fire. "We were trying to make Cedar Ridge before the worst of it hit, but the trail just disappeared about 5 miles back." Maddie filled the coffee pot with her dwindling supply of grounds, doing quick calculations in her head. 10 hungry men, the last of her flour, a few cans of beans, some salt pork that was more salt than pork. It might stretch to one meal if she was creative, but these looked like men with serious appetites. "Coffee'll be ready in a few minutes," she said. "Supper might take a while. I'm afraid my pantry's not exactly well stocked these days." Cole's eyes moved to the foreclosure notice on the table, taking in the official seal and legal language. When he looked back at her, there was understanding in those pale blue eyes, the recognition of someone who'd seen hard times before. "We're grateful for whatever you can spare, ma'am. More grateful than you know." By 9 o'clock, the storm had only grown worse. The wind rattled the windows so hard that Maddie feared the glass might shatter, and snow was piling up against the sides of the house like white sand dunes. According to Cole's reading of the weather signs, They were looking at least another day, maybe two, before the blizzard blew itself out. Maddie had managed to stretch her meager supplies into something resembling a meal. Beans seasoned with the last of her salt pork, biscuits made from the dregs of her flour barrel, and coffee that had been watered down to make it last. It wasn't much, but the Cowboys had accepted it with genuine gratitude, as if she'd served them a feast instead of scraps. Now they sat around her kitchen and parlor, some dozing in chairs, others quietly talking in the low voices of men accustomed to keeping their business private. The youngest, Jesse, had fallen asleep at the kitchen table, his head pillowed on his arms. Despite his attempts to look tough, exhaustion had finally claimed him. Buck Sullivan draped his coat over the kid's shoulders with surprising gentleness. "Reminds me of my grandson," he explained quietly when he caught Maddie watching. "Same stubborn streak, always trying to prove he's tougher than he really is." "Where's your grandson now?" Maddie asked, refilling Buck's coffee cup. "Back in Texas with his mama," Buck replied, his weathered face softening. "Boy's got schooling, a chance at something better than this life. His daddy didn't make it back from a drive 3 years ago. Comanches." His voice carried the weight of a grandfather's love, mixed with the harsh realities of frontier life. Maddie poured herself a cup of the weak coffee and leaned against the kitchen counter, studying her unexpected guests. In the warm lamplight, they looked less intimidating than they had when they'd first arrived. Their heavy coats hung over chairbacks, revealing ordinary clothes underneath: worn flannel shirts, patched denim, boots that had seen better days. These were working men, she realized. Hard men, certainly, probably dangerous when crossed, but men who earned their living with sweat and skill rather than just violence. The calluses on their hands spoke of long days in the saddle. The careful way they maintained their gear suggested pride in their craft. Cole approached the counter, his expression thoughtful. "Ma'am, we need to talk about payment. You've been more than generous, but we can't just take advantage of your kindness." "Don't worry about it," Maddie said quickly. "It's just food." "No, it's not," Cole said firmly. "It's hospitality. It's opening your door to strangers in a storm when you didn't have to. And it's costing you money you probably can't spare." Maddie felt heat rise in her cheeks. Was her situation that obvious? She tried to keep her voice steady. "I'm managing just fine." Cole's eyes moved again to the foreclosure notice, and she realized her attempt at privacy had failed completely. His expression softened with understanding that surprised her. "How long do you have?" he asked quietly. 10 days, Maddie admitted, the words falling out before she could stop them. "But that's my problem, not yours." "The hell it is," Red Mackenzie spoke up from his spot by the window, his Scottish accent thick with emotion. "You opened your door to us when you didn't have to. That makes it our concern, too." Tom Carter, who'd been silent most of the evening, finally spoke. "What's the story with this place? How long have you been running it?" 20 years, Maddie replied. "My husband Samuel and I built it up from nothing. It was his dream, a place where travelers could find shelter and a friendly face no matter what brought them to our door." Her voice caught slightly. "He always said we were supposed to be a beacon for folks passing through." "Sounds like he was a good man," Cole said. "The best," Maddie whispered. "Fever took him 3 years ago. I've been trying to keep the place going, but—" She gestured helplessly at the empty rooms, the worn furniture, the general air of barely controlled decay. Cole was quiet for a long moment, and Maddie could see him thinking, weighing something she couldn't guess at. Finally he spoke. "What if I told you that this place, your kindness, has probably saved more lives than you know?" Maddie frowned, setting down her coffee cup. "I'm not sure what you mean." 20 years is a long time," Cole said, his pale eyes studying her face. "A lot of travelers pass through this stretch of trail. A lot of people in trouble looking for help. You remember all of them?" Maddie shook her head. "There have been hundreds, maybe thousands over the years." "But you helped them all, didn't you?" Cole continued. "Hot coffee, a warm meal, maybe a safe place to sleep when they needed it most." I tried to, Maddie said. Samuel always said we were supposed to be a light for people. A sanctuary, you know. Someone who'd leave the lamp burning for travelers. Cole smiled, and there was something almost secretive about it. A sanctuary, he repeated. Yeah, that's exactly what you are. Before Maddie could ask what he meant, Buck Sullivan looked up from his spot near the fire, his weathered face creasing with sudden recognition. Hold on a minute, he said slowly. You said your name was Hawthorne? Maddie nodded. Martha Hawthorne. Most folks call me Maddie. Buck's eyes widened, and he sat forward in his chair. Well, I'll be damned. Boys, I think we're sitting in a legend. The quiet conversations around the room stopped. Every cowboy turned to look at Buck, then at Maddie, with expressions of growing interest. What are you talking about, Buck? Jesse asked, suddenly wide awake. Maddie Hawthorne, Buck said, his voice rising with excitement. The angel of Bitter Creek Valley. You remember that story I told you about the woman who saved my life during the winter of '79? Recognition hit Maddie like a physical blow. She stared at Buck, really looked at him for the first time, and suddenly she could see past the gray beard and weathered skin to the younger man who'd collapsed on her porch 15 years ago. Billy Sullivan, she whispered. You were half frozen, delirious with fever. You'd been riding for 3 days with a bullet in your shoulder. Buck's grin split his face. That's right. You pulled that slug out with your own hands, nursed me back to health over 2 weeks. When I tried to pay you, you said the only payment you wanted was for me to pass the kindness along to someone else who needed it. The room erupted in excited voices as the other cowboys began connecting pieces. Red Mackenzie snapped his fingers. That's why your name sounded familiar. You're the woman who helped that family during the cholera outbreak, aren't you? The memory came flooding back. The Henderson family, Maddie said. Their wagon broke down just outside Cedar Ridge. The whole family was sick, and the town wouldn't let them in for fear of contagion. You took them in anyway, Red continued. Nursed them all back to health, even though you risked catching it yourself. Mrs. Henderson was my cousin. She talked about you for years afterward, called you her guardian angel. Tom Carter, who'd been silent most of the evening, suddenly spoke up. What about that business with the Pinkerton men? That would have been maybe 8 years ago? Maddie's blood ran cold. That had been one of the most dangerous situations she'd ever faced. There was a young man, she said carefully. He'd been shot. Said some men were chasing him. I hid him in the root cellar until they passed. That young man was my brother, Tom said quietly. Danny Carter. Those Pinkertons were crooked, working for a cattle baron who wanted our family's land. Danny had evidence that could have put them in prison, but they were going to kill him for it. If you hadn't hidden him, if you hadn't sent him that message about the safe route to the territorial capital. Cole held up a hand, his expression growing serious. Wait a minute. How many of you boys have stories about this place? Around the room, hands began to rise. One by one, then all at once, until every cowboy in the room was looking at Maddie with expressions of recognition and gratitude. Jesus, Jesse breathed. We're all here because of her. Cole turned back to Maddie, his pale eyes intense. Ma'am, do you have any idea how many lives you've touched? How many people owe you debts they can never repay? Maddie sank onto a kitchen stool, overwhelmed by the weight of these revelations. She'd helped people over the years, certainly, but she'd never thought of it as anything extraordinary. She'd just done what felt right, what Samuel would have wanted her to do. Those calls I need to make, Cole said, standing and reaching for his coat. They're starting to make a lot more sense now. Cole stepped out into the howling blizzard, and through the frost-covered windows, Maddie could see him pacing back and forth in the snow, his voice occasionally rising above the wind as he shouted into the storm. The other cowboys watched him through the glass, exchanging glances that suggested they knew something she didn't. What's he doing out there? Maddie asked. There's no telegraph lines for miles, and the nearest town is Cedar Ridge. Buck Sullivan chuckled, a sound rich with secrets. Cole's got his ways of getting word out. The Cowboy network runs deeper than most folks realize. While Cole continued his mysterious communication in the storm, the stories kept coming. Each cowboy in her kitchen had a tale of how the Crosswinds Ranch had touched their lives, or the lives of people they cared about. Red Mackenzie told of a winter night 5 years past when his younger brother had been thrown from his horse and broke his leg. "You and Samuel set that bone yourselves," he said, his Scottish accent thick with emotion. "Kept him here for a month until it healed proper. Wouldn't take a cent for payment." Tom Carter spoke of a time when a group of children separated from a wagon train had wandered onto her property, lost and terrified. "You fed them, kept them safe, and when their parents finally found them 3 days later, you sent them off with enough supplies to last the rest of their journey." Jesse, no longer trying to hide his youth, shared the most personal story of all. "My sister and her husband were passing through 2 years ago," he said quietly. "She was with child, and the baby came early. Real early. The doctor in Cedar Ridge wouldn't come out in the storm, said it was too risky." Maddie remembered that night vividly, the young woman screaming in pain, the husband pacing frantically, the feeling of helplessness as she'd done what she could with no medical training. "You delivered that baby yourself," Jesse continued, his voice thick. "Little girl named Hope. My sister said you were the first person to hold her, the first to welcome her into the world. That baby's walking now, talking, because of what you did that night." As the stories unfolded, Maddie began to see a pattern she'd never noticed before. The Crosswinds Ranch sat at a crucial junction of trails, the main cattle route from the northern ranges, the wagon road to Cedar Ridge, the mountain pass that connected the eastern settlements to the western territories. For 20 years, she and Samuel had been perfectly positioned to help people at their most vulnerable moments. "You know what the Cowboys call this place?" Buck asked. "From here to Montana, from Colorado to Oregon, they call it Angel's Rest, the one safe haven between the Badlands and civilization." Cole returned from his trek through the storm, snow covering him from head to toe, but his expression was satisfied. "Done," he announced to the room. "Word's going out tonight." "What word?" Maddie asked. "That the Angel of Bitter Creek Valley needs help," Cole replied simply, "and that every man who's ever been grateful for this place has a chance to pay that debt." Tom Carter looked up from cleaning his rifle. "How many do you think will come?" "Hard to say," Cole admitted. "Weather's bad, and it's short notice. But the network's strong, and memories run long out here." He looked at Maddie with those pale, knowing eyes. "Could be 20 riders, could be 50, could be more." Buck Sullivan laughed, a sound like thunder. "You boys don't understand. This isn't just about cowboys anymore. The word's going to spread to every outfit, every ranch, every settlement within 100 miles. By morning, every man, woman, and child who's ever been helped by this place is going to know that Maddie Hawthorne needs them." Red Mackenzie nodded slowly. "The Henderson family's got cousins all through the territory. They'll spread the word. The Carter family's got influence with the Cattlemen's Association," Tom added. Jesse grinned despite his exhaustion. "My brother-in-law runs freight between here and Cheyenne. He knows every driver on the trail." Cole walked to the window and looked out at the storm that was finally beginning to show signs of weakening. "By dawn," he said quietly, "this place is going to look very different." "What do you mean?" Maddie asked. Cole turned back to her with a smile that held 20 years of gratitude. "You're about to find out exactly how many lives you've saved, Angel. And every one of them is riding this way." By first light, the storm had finally begun to break. The wind that had howled like a banshee for 3 days was settling into occasional gusts, and patches of pale sky were visible through the thinning clouds. Maddie stood at her kitchen window, watching the sun rise over a world transformed by snow when she heard it. At first, it was just a distant rumble, like thunder rolling across the valley, but as it grew closer, she realized it wasn't thunder at all. It was the sound of horses, dozens and dozens of them, moving in formation across the frozen landscape. "Cole," she called, her voice barely a whisper, "you need to see this." The cowboy leader joined her at the window, and his weathered face broke into a slow grin. "Right on time," he said. Through the morning mist, riders were emerging from every direction. They came down from the mountain passes, up from the valley floor, along the main trail from Cedar Ridge. The thunder of hoofbeats grew louder as more and more horsemen converged on the Crosswinds Ranch, their breath and that of their mounts creating great clouds of steam in the cold air. "Sweet Mother of God," Buck Sullivan breathed, joining them at the window. "Look at them all." What Maddie saw defied belief. This wasn't just a group of cowboys, this was an army. Riders from cattle outfits across 3 territories, their brands and colors identifying them as men from the Box T, the Flying W, the Rocking Horse, and dozens of other spreads. Mixed among them were townspeople from Cedar Ridge, freight drivers, even a few women riding side saddle with grim determination. The first group to reach the ranch house was led by a massive man on an equally massive black stallion. As he dismounted, Maddie could see the star pinned to his coat. Sheriff Marcus Webb from Cedar Ridge, a man she'd helped years ago when his own daughter had taken sick during a harsh winter. "Mrs. Hawthorne," he called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "We heard you might be having some trouble with the bank." Behind him, more riders were arriving by the minute. Maddie recognized faces from years past. Travelers she'd sheltered, families she'd helped, cowboys she'd fed and doctored. But there were also strangers, people she'd never seen before who'd ridden through the storm simply because they'd heard that the Angel of Bitter Creek Valley needed help. A woman in her 30s dismounted near the porch, her face flushed from the cold ride. "Mrs. Hawthorne? I'm Sarah Henderson. Well, Sarah Mitchell now. You saved my family during the cholera outbreak 15 years ago." The memories came flooding back, a terrified young mother with 3 sick children, turned away by every establishment in Cedar Ridge. Maddie had taken them in without hesitation, nursed them back to health despite the risk to herself. "Sarah," Maddie whispered, "how did you get here so fast?" "My husband owns the freight company between here and Cheyenne," Sarah replied. "When word came down the line last night that you were in trouble, he sent riders to every stop, every ranch, every settlement. We've been riding since before dawn." More familiar faces emerged from the crowd. The young man Tom Carter had called his brother Danny, now grown and prosperous, leading a group of riders from the territorial capital. The Henderson family patriarch with his sons and cousins, at least 15 strong. A grizzled old prospector who'd sheltered at the ranch during a blizzard 8 years ago, now accompanied by half the miners from the silver camps. But perhaps most shocking of all was the arrival of an elegant carriage bearing the seal of the Territorial Banking Commission. The door opened, and out stepped a distinguished gentleman in a fine coat, Governor's Representative William Hayes, a man Maddie had once helped when his stage had broken down during an Indian scare. "Mrs. Hawthorne," he called out formally, "I believe there's been some misunderstanding about your mortgage situation." Cole appeared at Maddie's elbow with a thick leather saddlebag. $4,700, he announced to the crowd. Cash from every outfit, every settlement, every grateful soul who remembers what this place means. The cheer that erupted from the assembled riders shook snow from the pine trees. Hats flew into the air, and the sound of celebration echoed off the mountains like cannon fire. Sheriff Webb stepped forward with official-looking papers. "Mrs. Hawthorne, by order of the Territorial Authority, the Crosswinds Ranch is hereby designated as an official way station under territorial protection. Any interference with its operation will be considered a territorial offense." Maddie stared at the sea of faces surrounding her home, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. 6 months later, the Crosswinds Ranch had been transformed into something that would have made Samuel's dreams seem small by comparison. What had once been a struggling homestead was now the most important way station between the Colorado Territory and Montana, officially recognized by 3 territorial governments and protected by an informal network that stretched across the entire American West. The ranch house had been expanded with a proper dining hall that could seat 50 travelers at once. The old barn had been rebuilt twice its original size, with stalls for 100 horses and storage for supplies that kept the place running year-round. A new bunkhouse provided clean beds for cowboys, travelers, and anyone else who needed shelter, while a separate building housed the telegraph office that kept Maddie connected to settlements across 3 territories. But the most remarkable change wasn't in the buildings. It was in the constant stream of life that flowed through the ranch. Every day brought new faces, old friends, and stories that added to the legend of Angel's Rest. The cowboys who'd sheltered there during the blizzard had become regular visitors, checking in on Maddie and ensuring that word of the ranch's importance spread throughout the territory. Cole Brennan had established a permanent camp just over the ridge, leading a group of 20 riders who'd taken it upon themselves to patrol the trails and ensure safe passage for travelers. They called themselves the Guardian Angels, and their presence had virtually eliminated banditry along a 100-mile stretch of the main cattle trail. The financial transformation had been equally dramatic. The $4,700 raised that first morning had not only paid off the mortgage, but funded the expansion. Governor's Representative Hayes had arranged for the ranch to receive territorial funding as an official way station, providing a steady income that ensured Maddie would never face foreclosure again. More importantly, the ranch had become largely self-sustaining. Grateful travelers left donations, cattle outfits paid for regular services, and the territorial government provided supplies and equipment. The success had attracted permanent staff, a cook, 2 ranch hands, and even a doctor who decided that serving the Angel of Bitter Creek Valley was a higher calling than maintaining a practice in town. On this particular evening, as autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Maddie stood on her expanded porch, watching the daily ritual that had become as regular as sunrise. A wagon train of settlers was pulling in for the night, their faces showing the exhaustion and hope of people seeking new lives in the Western Territories. Behind them, a group of cowboys from the Flying W outfit was settling their horses for the evening, while a freight wagon loaded with supplies for the mining camps was already unhitched and secure. Buck Sullivan approached from the direction of the new bunkhouse, his gray beard now neatly trimmed and his clothes bearing the subtle improvements that came with steady income and purpose. He'd become Maddie's unofficial foreman, coordinating the constant flow of people and ensuring that everyone received the help they needed. "Evening count is 63 souls under our roof tonight," he reported with satisfaction, including a family with twin babies born just last week and a young couple heading to Oregon to start a fruit farm. Maddie nodded, still amazed by how normal this extraordinary life had become. "Any word from Cole?" "Rode in an hour ago with news from Cheyenne. Territorial governors planning an official visit next month to dedicate the ranch as a permanent historical landmark." Buck's eyes twinkled with pride. "Says Angel's Rest represents the best of frontier hospitality." Through the dining hall windows, Maddie could see the evening meal in progress. Families sharing tables with cowboys, miners swapping stories with settlers, children playing games that transcended the social boundaries that existed in more civilized places. This was what Samuel had envisioned all those years ago, not just a business, but a true sanctuary where all travelers were family. The old telegraph in the office began chattering, and Maddie could hear young Jesse Martinez, now her official communications operator, taking down a message, probably another request for shelter, another traveler who'd heard of the place where kindness was never turned away. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Maddie felt Samuel's presence beside her. She could almost hear his voice on the evening wind. "I told you this place would be special, Maddie girl." but I never imagined it would become the heart of something this big. The light would always guide them home. Thanks for joining us for this incredible story of how one act of kindness during a blizzard created a legend that spread across the American West. Hit that like button if this story moved you, and subscribe for more tales of frontier courage and community. Don't forget to ring the notification bell, because every story we share proves that kindness, no matter how small, can change the world.